Hmm. Hi, everybody. Sorry I've been slow getting started tonight. I had a meeting before this one, that's why I'm a bit late. But of course, this has been a very active day once again for the discussion of impeachment. And therefore, I wanted to spend a little time talking about it this evening. Let me check to see that my sound is as it should be. Seems to be okay. I hope you can all hear me okay. I'll check in with you on Facebook and see if that's the case right now. Hi, Greg. Hi, Cora. Nice to see you both. Please share. I see there are a number of people here, but oh, and already 27 shares. Thank you. That's really great. That is very quick work. I can't tell who else is here because you're not showing on my comment stream yet, but I'm sure I'll get there before too long. Anyway, to get to the point, hi Dolores. Hi Dad, Dale Weaver. Nice to see you. And Dolores, it's very nice to see you too. So the title of the stream tonight is "Should the scope of the impeachment inquiry be limited to the Ukrainian situation?" Now I know I said now on but two different occasions that I think that we want to go through the impeachment process very quickly, as quickly as we can, and certainly get it all done and completed by the end of the year. And I pointed out that it's imperative that we get it completed by that time. But I don't think that means the scope of the inquiry should be limited to the Ukrainian situation alone. It's not that that alone is an insufficient basis on which to impeach somebody. I mean, I think it is really a pretty good basis for impeaching the president. It seems pretty clear from the transcription of the report of the whistleblower that there was an attempt to influence the government of the Ukraine to release certain information that would help the Trump campaign here. Now, I know there are counterpoints that can be made to this. I don't think those arguments are valid, but whether or not I think they're valid is not really the question. The question is whether there are comebacks that will be plausible to certain people, that can be used in the press, that can be used to propagandize, that can be used to cloud the situation, to make it a gray situation instead of a black and white situation. I think when you limit the scope of the inquiry to just one thing this way, you maximize the chances that this will be judged by the public as being in the gray area, or as being too political, or as being biased against the president, or as being a witch hunt by the Democrats. On the other hand, there are so many instances of acts by the president that are impeachable acts, that while I don't think the Democrats ought to put together a list of 500 such acts, and build detail, on each one, I think that there's a middle ground here. That you can cover maybe 10 or 11 things that are really egregious, that have occurred during the administration so far, and that you can prosecute the impeachment case on those things. You can put together that kind of list actually very quickly. And once you've put that list together, you can call some credible witnesses also very quickly. And then you can vote on it in the House very quickly as well. And then go to the Senate with this bill of particulars, which will be convincing and will be persuasive to people. I think Nancy Pelosi made a grave political mistake in limiting the scope to a single issue, which may be considered by many people as obscure. Or, of course, there's always the question of the hypocrisy. In other words, it's pretty clear from the underlying situation that Joe Biden was involved in a similar situation to try to benefit his own family by exerting influence on the government of the Ukraine back in 2015, or was it in 2016? I forget. And so people are going to point to that. And they're going to say, why are you just implying this standard to Trump right now? Why wasn't it applied to Joe Biden? And to some people, that's going to be convincing, and maybe enough people to take pressure off the Republicans. Remember, the game here is that if you really want to impeach Donald Trump or seriously damage Donald Trump in this particular situation, then you have to bring a sufficient amount of public pressure to bear that a considerable number of the Republicans, at least a decent number of the Republicans, will vote with the Democratic side on this, both in the House and in the Senate, in order to create the impression that there is at least some degree of bipartisanship here. Now, there are some reports from the underside of Capitol Hill, based on Republican establishment but campaign operatives, who have said that if a secret ballot were conducted on impeachment tomorrow or today, that 30 Republican senators would vote to get rid of Trump, partly because there's a lot of there's really bad blood there, but also because they're beginning to realize that Trump is a real burden on their ticket. Supposedly, they're very worried about the Arizona election right now. They thought that the chances of Martha McSally to win, in that election, were pretty good when they went into the race. Now they think that Martha McSally has a very good chance to lose. They see Susan Collins in Maine as very threatened, and Cory Gardner as also very threatened. And remember, in this election, there is something like 22 Republicans on the block in the Senate. The map favors the Democrats this time. And the Republicans don't want to have a situation where they have to say to people, we stood with Trump. We stood with Trump. So as the pressure grows, as more issues emerge, as we get more and more into a situation where it appears there's not just one single issue against Trump, but there are all kinds of emoluments clause issues. And there are human rights violation issues. And there are bribery issues. And that all of these issues emerge. Okay? Greg Mallard points out that the seat of Senator Perdue in Georgia is also insecure because what's going on with Trump. Amber Lee Grigo is here. Hi, Amber Lee. How are you? Says she's just popping in for a second while she's at work. Okay, thanks for popping in. So, there may be many more seats on the chopping block in the Senate than just the 3 that were named by the Republican campaign operatives. And of course, if you can develop a bill with 10 or 11 different issues on it, and all seem to be rather valid, the chances are much greater that some of these Republicans will come over. Also, people who are old enough to recall what happened in 1973 to Nixon, uh, they know that there were enough charges built up that it was possible for many of the Republicans to actually vote to acquit the president on most of the charges, but then to vote to convict on one final charge, so they could say to their constituents, I voted to convict, and to other constituents who were more favorable to Nixon, well, after all, I voted to acquit on most of the issues. But this last one thing, I just couldn't stomach it because it was so outstandingly violative of the laws or the Constitution, or whatever. Anyway, that's what a lot of the Republicans did in the Nixon impeachment in 1973. They had the room to do that because the decision was not limited in scope to a single issue. So Greg says there are also rumors of Congressman Buddy Carter of Georgia in the 1st Congressional District and Rick Allen of Georgia in the 12th Congressional District being unseated as well. Yeah, I mean, there could well be a slaughter in the House where the majority of the Democrats, in other words, the number of Democrats in the House, might even grow to 270 or 280 or a figure like that. If the situation gets so bad that Trump's approval rating drops into the 35%, 32%, 33%. In other words, it's almost a responsibility of Nancy Pelosi's to ensure that the potential for that to happen is built into the impeachment process. And here she is. She's made a decision to limit the scope of the formal impeachment inquiry. Why might she be doing that? Well, one reason why she might be doing that, there are many reasons why she might be doing that, but one reason is because she didn't want to go forward with an impeachment inquiry anyway. And what she wants to do is, she had overwhelming majority of the caucus in favor of it. So she didn't want to go against the whole caucus, so she authorized this very limited scope impeachment inquiry in hopes that she could wind it up real fast and end or choke off the possibility of an impeachment circus, have it go to the Senate, have Mitch McConnell sweep it under the rug, or maybe get the Republicans on record on this one issue, and then it would be over and done with, and the Democrats and the DNC could then proceed with their plans for the campaign, which were to endorse someone who at least seemed a little bit beholden to the establishment, and if possible to get their favorite or their favorites, either Joe Biden or Kamala Harris. Though frankly, right now, Harris really seems to have gone into the tank in that last poll in California, our home state, or I'm sorry, perhaps it was the Emerson national poll. She seems to now be at 3% in the Emerson national poll. Incredible, just incredible that she's fallen to 3%. I mean, based on, what was it, a minute or a minute and a half exchange with Tulsi Gabbard? Okay, in the second of the debates, that's been a really, really important thing in tanking her support, which it turned out was very, very fragile. Now, the unfortunate thing about this particular issue which is not so favorable to Nancy Pelosi's side or to her plans, is that by limiting the scope, it's likely that Democrats who want to go heavy on this are going to have to spend a lot of time on the details of this. And of course, the Trump side will respond by telling more and more stories about what was going on with Joe Biden a few years back. And that's likely to depress seriously support for Joe Biden, then further swinging the Democratic contest over to Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, which I can't imagine makes Nancy Pelosi very happy. But I think what's really going to put a crimp in her plans for this, what's really going to create a different situation here, is that by giving this limited concession to the caucus, I don't think that Nancy has done nearly enough to stop the grumbling and stop the movement in the caucus to really go after Trump and go after the Republicans in the Senate. And I think that the Judiciary Committee and Jerry Nadler are going to lobby strongly to increase the scope of this. And all kinds of outside groups are going to lobby to increase the scope of this. I don't think Nancy Pelosi is going to be able to take the pressure. After all, she could not take the pressure on stopping a formal impeachment inquiry altogether. She had in the end to give in to it. Now people are going to count the representatives in the caucus who want a broadened inquiry. I mean, the press is going to descend on the Congress people and ask people, poll people, and ask them how many are satisfied with the limited scope of the formal inquiry. And that number is going to build. Maybe it will start off at 120 or 130 and then go to 160 or 170, clearly a majority of the caucus. And then the calls will start for her to broaden the scope of the formal impeachment inquiry. And then she's going to be in trouble. She's not going to be able to play these games. I'm sure Jerry Nadler is going to ask for unlimited scope of the formal impeachment inquiry, just as they had with Nixon, just as the Republicans had with Clinton. I mean, why should Nancy Pelosi be wanting to limit the weapons which the Democrats will have to influence public opinion to support their desire to get him out of there, to hold him accountable? On the other hand, from the Republican point of view, as Trump becomes a greater and greater liability as all these stories come out, there's going to be pressure both on the House side and the Senate side to join up, to give in. Because why had they stuck with Trump so long? Because they've been worried about his capability to make them pay in 2020, to primary them in 2020, to make the establishment Democrats actually run against his people. But the more unpopular he becomes, the less the establishment Democrats will be afraid of that. and the more likely it will be that they will say, look, Trump is threatening our careers now. We're not going down on this ship with him. And then the rats will start leaving the sinking ship. You can just see that this will happen. Please share this as much as you can. I'd really appreciate it. And when it goes up on YouTube, which will be very soon after this, please share, like, and subscribe over there. And please do visit my Patreon page. But anyway, to go on with the discussion, I know many people have been saying that this impeachment process is going to hurt the Democrats. I believe there's a good chance of that happening if Nancy Pelosi's decision to limit the scope of the formal impeachment inquiry stands. But if it doesn't stand, if she's made to give in and to broaden the scope of the inquiry, there's enough time to make this stick. There's enough time to bring out some of the really egregious abuses of his position as president. And more importantly, to make the points for the future that our presidents, our vice presidents, our high officials in the Congress and the Supreme Court are not to use their offices for their own personal gain. We need to end the moral hazard in the United States that has been victimizing us. And this is it, that it's become commonplace for them to use their offices for personal gain. We have to send them a message here, and that message has to be that if you do that, there will come a day of reckoning, and you will pay. And Trump has to be the model for this. He has to be the model for this. He has to be impeached. He has to be removed from office. And then he has to be prosecuted at the state level. And he has to go to prison. He has to go to prison. So, why do I think that broadening the inquiry is going to be good for the Democrats? And why do I care whether it's good for the Democrats? I only want it to be good for the Democrats so that the party that's in power in the Congress and is getting this kind of behavior from a president that is in opposition of the Congress can learn that they can oppose the president, that they can oppose a tyrant, that they can check the tyrant while the tyrant is in office, and that they can use the Constitution to replace the tyrant, that they don't have to wait for the next election to replace the tyrant. Trump is a tyrant. Nothing has been more clear. No president of the United States has been more tyrannical than Donald J. Trump. The impeachment clause was made for him. We have to have the courage to use it now. And the Democrats have to do it in a proper way so that it works for them both in the legal sense or the quasi-legal sense that he is replaced, but also in the political sense that they get the credit for what will happen, for what is going to happen. Okay. Remember this, okay? When Andrew Johnson was impeached and his conviction in the Senate fell short by one vote, there was all this talk, and especially among historians later, about what a terrible thing it was to try to impeach Andrew Johnson over political differences with the radical Republicans. But the truth was that Andrew Johnson at the time was a bad president. He was a terrible president. And he tried not at all to deal with the Congress, to compromise with the Congress, to recognize that the Republicans had an overwhelming advantage in the Congress. And what happened as a result? As a result, the rest of his presidency passed very quietly. But who won in the next election? It was the Republicans. The Republicans won. They did not suffer at the polls because of the impeachment of Andrew Johnson. In the 1970s, after the impeachment, who suffered at the polls? It wasn't the Democrats. In 1976, Carter won by a substantial margin, and the Democrats swept into Congress with overwhelming majorities again. Now, of course, they botched it up. We can go into the reasons for that some other time. But if they had had the will to do so, they could have passed the Medicare for All bill right then and there. They had the votes. They had the votes in 1977 to pass a Medicare for All bill, and how many lives would have been saved had they done so. But that's not the point. The point is that the party in power in Congress did not lose seats because they impeached the president. And let's look at the Clinton situation. Everybody said at the time, oh, this whole thing is bogus, and it's terrible that Clinton is getting impeached over this. I mean, I felt that way too, that it was terrible that, he was getting impeached over it. And I was sure the Republicans were going to have to pay for that in the election of 2000. Guess what? The public did not make them pay for that. It was a close election, and the Republicans, due to the intervention of a Supreme Court with a majority of their party on it, stole the election from Al Gore. So, did the Republicans suffer because they impeached Bill Clinton? No, I don't think they suffered. I think they gained. If they had not impeached him, then Al Gore would have used Bill Clinton and his record in his campaign far more than he did. And most likely, Al Gore would have won in the election of 2000. So all three instances of impeachment in the history of America show that the impeaching party has not been hurt by the impeachment. I mean, maybe they were hurt for a limited amount of time, a short amount of time. But by the time the election rolled around, other issues were at hand, and the impeachment did not affect that particular election. So, we can remove the moral hazard represented by Donald Trump. We can hold him accountable. And there's no reason to believe that the party does that will suffer in the election of 2020. So that's a bogeyman that I think is just a bogeyman. I'm not saying it can't happen. It can happen because Nancy Pelosi can make such a mess of this. She and other Democrats who are desperately trying to protect their establishment and Joe Biden can make such a mess of this that Trump may be able to turn it around. But, on the other hand, we are not passive actors in this. We are active participants in the political process, and we can swing opinion in such a way that we broaden the scope of the inquiry. And if we can do that, we can get the better result we want. We can get a broadening of the issues. We can bring the corruption issue to the fore. We can make the candidates that are anti-corruption and anti-establishment the leading candidates on the Democratic side. And maybe we can even impact who is nominated on the Republican side. First of all, if Trump is impeached, I don't think Pence is going to have a ghost of a chance of being nominated as the president by the Republican Party, because he's been too closely tied in with Trump. He's been too much his servant. He can't establish any distance now. So I think he will be a caretaker president, and the Republicans will let him be, and they will nominate somebody else who has a hope of presenting themselves as some kind of clean gene. I'm not sure who their clean gene will be. I don't know if they can repaint, let's say, Romney that way. But maybe Bill Weld. If they get behind Bill Weld, I mean, after all, Bill Weld was a pretty clean gene when he was the governor of Massachusetts. He was a nice guy. He was a moderate Republican. He was a good governor. He was popular in one of the most leftish states of the Union. Nobody ever accused him of any corruption. So maybe it goes that way. I'll tell you something else. I'm sure Bill Weld is much more impressed with the seriousness of the environmental arguments and the climate change arguments than any of the other Republicans who are running right now. So, we've got to get involved. We've got to pressure. We've got to demand a broader scope of the formal inquiry. And we've also got to demand that they step through the process quickly and get it done before the end of the year. So Michael Moore had a piece today. I guess he originally put it onto Facebook, and a lot of it did not make a lot of sense, and he was behind the curve on noting that Nancy Pelosi had authorized only a limited scope, of inquiry. But he was very strong on the idea of doing this quickly. He wanted to get it done in the House sometime in October. Well, I don't know if we can move as quickly as that if we increase the scope of the inquiry. But we can get this done by November. We can send it up to Mitch McConnell by November. And meanwhile, new developments will be reported on this every day in the mainstream media. And there'll be a catalog of charges against Trump that will be circulating around the country that is sure to depress his popularity and his vote in the fall, assuming McConnell and the other Republicans stick with him. But I think the probabilities are pretty good that they're not going to stick with him. Okay. So now I'd like to go to the discussion. So I'll start to read out your comments. As is my habit. And Cora Emanuel says, arguably it's bad optics to impeach Trump on this issue alone. I couldn't agree more. And Greg Mallard said it's also showing U.S. Senator David Perdue here in Georgia threatened as well. Amber Lee says, hi, Dr. Joe, just popping in. I guess I read that before. And Greg says, U.S. Senator Johnny Isakson is retiring after 2019, and his seat here in Georgia is also up for grabs. So who's going to run for that seat? You think it'll be Stacey Abrams, Greg? And Lana Dell says, my Republican chiropractor is for impeachment. The regular Republicans don't like Trump much. Yeah, I think they do like Trump much. I don't think they like him at all. I think they think he's a disgrace for the Republican Party. Dale Weaver joined, and Greg Mallard says, I read an article where Georgia could become a lean blue state after 2020. And the Georgia GOP is seeing their approval ratings sinking. It wouldn't surprise me, Greg. I think Georgia has been tending towards a purple state for some time now. There have been a lot of close elections, which might have gone for the Democrats except for the rigging. And the last election for governor, for example, would almost certainly have gone to the Democrats except for the rigging. Lana says, Gary Houck says, love your take on this, Joe. Thank you, Gary. And Lana says, Nancy Pelosi, I think she means, is playing a side game with Trump. I don't trust Nancy at all. She's playing a side game with Trump to try to keep establishment control of the Democratic Party. Probably. Susan Eldridge has joined. Okay. Evelina Apont says, so glad Kamala is out of the way. Yeah, me too. I really can't stand Kamala. She's just so egregious. And so Nancy Blackmar has joined. Okay. Evelina Pont says, yes, sir. And Jimmy Sunderland has joined. Hi, Jimmy. How are you? Greg Mallard's. It's funny how they decide to do this during a presidential primary election cycle. Yeah, Pelosi should have done it on the first day the Democrats took over in 2019, January 1st. She should have had it done by March. What do you say to people who say, but Pence is just as bad, okay, or worse? Pence may be just as bad or worse in his policies, but he's not just as bad or worse when it comes to being able to whip up support among the rightists. He doesn't have the charisma, okay, of Trump. He cannot organize the mass rallies that Trump is able to organize. He won't be able to pull people into the rallies. He won't be able to. I mean, he won't be able to have the Twitter following and stir things up every day. His is going to be a quiet presidency. He's going to do bad things, but also he's going to be more amenable to Republican influence from the establishment. Why? Because he was always part of that establishment. He is one of their own. The Republican leadership in the House will be able to walk into Pence's office anytime. They'll be able to go over there and have lunch all the time. He's got friends over there. He's got friends in the establishment, close people he worked with for years. So, yeah, I mean, ideologically, he's worse than Trump. But I think that given all the personal considerations and the social context, okay, and everything else, I don't think he's near as dangerous, okay, as Trump. And also, he's not going to take the foreign policy risks that Trump has taken in various ways. Okay, Evelina Ponce says a brilliant argument. Thank you, Evelina. And Nancy Blackmar says, once again, you are spot on. Thank you, Nancy. And Greg Mallet says, Stacey Abrams said she won't run for the U.S. Senate. We do have the mayor of Columbus, Georgia, running for the U.S. Senate. Her name is Teresa Tomlinson. I hope that's a name to conjure with, Greg. Greg says, Brian Kemp rigged his own election by suppressing 1.6 million voters since 2014, most of which were people of color. I know. Yes, I know he did that. He should have been stopped. Okay, any further comments while you're thinking of those? Okay, if you want to make any. I'll flash my Patreon screen once more. So please share, like, and subscribe, and become a patron at www.patreon.com/Joe_Firestone. And thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for listening. And thank you very much for participating. I like to see you participate. I enjoy answering questions, commenting on comments. That's really part of my live stream activity that I value very much. And Greg says a federal investigation should have been launched into Georgia's illegal governor's election. I know. It should have been launched actually by Obama. Look at that. My screen froze in between. Isn't that interesting? Well, I think it will come out all right in a minute. It's any consolation on my XSplit screen. That problem does not exist. It's only on my Facebook screen. There, it's gone now. It just froze. Yes, it should have been launched by the Obama administration and completed before Obama left. But Obama was too busy trying to pass the TPP. And when I get a chance, I'm going to go over the TPP again and why anything like the TPP with the investor state dispute about settlement clause is something that we absolutely want to get rid of for good. Milana says, I'm glad more folks are joining you recently. Well, thank you, Lana. I'm glad you've been helping with that. We know you've been helping with that, and thank you very much. And thank all of you for helping with that. Things finally seem to be breaking loose a little for me. I hope they start to break loose on YouTube also. I'd love to have a bigger audience there than I have right now. Any other final comments? And Lana sends me a heart with an arrow in it. Thank you, Lana. And my daughter Devora has joined. Just in time to say goodnight, unless you have some comments, honey. And Greg Mallet says, I share your YouTube across 3 social media platforms. Thank you, Greg. And Cora says, thanks, Joe, and good night. And good night to you, Cora, and thanks for coming. And Lana says, remind the name of the YouTube channel. Okay, Lana. What is the name of my YouTube channel? Okay. The name of my YouTube channel is... I'm sitting right on the channel now, but... here we go. It's Joseph Firestone.
That's creative.
The name of my panel is Joseph Firestone. I hope that helps. And Dale was kind enough to post the link to my Patreon account. Thank you very much, Dale. Any other comments? Questions? Any questions on my argument for broadening the scope of the formal impeachment inquiry and then doing it fast? He should be impeached for what he's been doing to the kids at the border. I mean, not to list that among the articles of impeachment
International law
is so egregious. That is so illegal. It's a total violation of our treaties. It's a violation of international law. And it's a violation of the U.S. law governing asylum seeking. Greg said you said everything perfectly. Thanks, Greg. I appreciate that. Lana says, okay, and good night. And Sandy Deggs says, you need to change it too. Quote, the Magnificent Joe. Unquote. But thank you, Sandy. But I think I might just content myself by changing it to Joe Firestone.
Let's work on this.
So Bonnie says, let's work on this. Okay. I will let Bonnie work on me for a while about it, about what I should call the channel. I admit it might do somewhat better with a more catchy name. And maybe my daughter's got some ideas. But thank you, Sandy. I really appreciate that. Thank you for all the kind comments this evening as well. Okay, I guess it's time to say goodnight. So I'll be ending the stream now. Once more, thank you for coming. And this is Thursday night. So I'll be seeing you next on Saturday. I'll be taking off tomorrow.